Blue jeans, cold beer, hot cars. This is the image most of us have of hot rodding. Wild kids, long hair, no deodorants, no responsibility. Just loud, fast cars and an urge to speed, come hell or high accident rates. It's supposed to be a symptom of our degenerating young, of moral rot, and a whole lot of other pious-sounding things. It's also a stereotype which, like stereotypes in cheap films and paperback thrillers, has very much to do with things as they really are. Go, baby. Cut out. Push it, baby. Drag. What most of us would like to think drag racing is, or call it at any rate, is no longer the fantasy stuff of flicks. It's seldom a late-at-night back road activity. Now, baby, and though your eardrums may live to regret it, here it is. What happens is absurdly simple, but then what sport isn't when reduced to its fundamentals? Two competing cars pull up to the starting line. When the front wheels of the racing cars are lined up for go, a ready light goes on, set off by a photoelectric cell. When the starter has both cars in position, he throws a switch that activates the Christmas tree. The starting light, handful of seconds on a quarter-mile run. Frenzied zip along a 1,320-foot asphalt aisle, and it's over. The first one to reach the far end wins, the other loses. It's just like racing from stoplight to stoplight along Roosevelt Boulevard. On Saturday and Sunday at any of the 12 drag strips in driving distance of Philadelphia, like this one at Atco, New Jersey, the flow of cars is as heavy as rush hour traffic on the expressway, except the cars come and go in pairs, and the spectators are counted in the thousands. The people who decide such things don't recognize drag racing as a sport. It's too dirty to be in the same class with the millionaire sports, pre-racing, or even the Brickyard at Indianapolis. This is weekday mechanics, weekend hero type doings. The people themselves are a mixed bag of types. They don't fit the stereotypes of age or background.
People think of drag racing as a young man's sport. What's an old guy like you doing out here on the strip?
Couldn't afford it when we were young. The car cost in the neighborhood of $5,000, building it from scratch. So it really doesn't pay for itself. We're weekend warriors, is what we call ourselves.
But there are also the kids, without the hair. It gets in your eyes when you're laying rubber at over 100 miles an hour. No leather jackets. They're too hot. Besides, leather's for the sickies of the motorcycle set. If there is a costume at all, it's a T-shirt with somebody's advertising on it. You don't find beer at these places. The sport calls for a steady eye and hand. Motor happy? Yes. These men are intellectually, economically, even physically in love with a car. They wallow in its grease, maintain its engine surfaces like $4 manicurists, feed it fuels as carefully as a mother feeds a colicky infant. They call it a name like... There's nothing new about giving names to the family beasts of burden. Today it's bent bolt or bat wagon. Yesterday it was old paint or dollar. In the old days, the family horse was kept in the fields where she properly belonged, Monday through Friday anyway. But on weekends, your great-grandfather used to hitch up that long-suffering nag to the family buckboard and run her to distraction, trying to whoop Farmer Brown race down to the crossroads. If you give it some thought, you'll agree that modern-day drag racers are in that long Western American tradition of man and old paint. In effect, they're just taking the family nag out to the drag strip to see how fast she'll do. Just for example, the lowest rung in the drag race ladder is made up of the real old paints, the stockers, family sedans that have to run down the aisle pretty much as they rolled out of the showrooms. Within the overall stock class, there are places for both the sporty Thoroughbred 8 and the homey Sludge-O-Matic 4. But many drag racers, like your grandfather, are not satisfied with just plain old paint, a standard production line model. Our grandpappies made it different strains of horses to gain more speed. And as you move from the stock classes, you start getting into cars that begin to look like fantasy hot rods. You also begin to see the results of crossbreeding, breeding for a purpose. Take this thing. It's in the gas class. A gasser must have a production line body regardless of age or make. But it's been stripped of all production line essentials. The rear tires have been made wider to obtain greater traction on the getaway. This body, an English Austin, originally held a 20 horsepower putt-putt. Now it sports a hopped-up, almost 800 horsepower Chrysler. This makes it more powerful for its limited purpose, and certainly less useful on the road. You wouldn't drive one of these things to the office any sooner than you'd harness a pair of Derby winners to the front end of a milk wagon. It's also a more safely built car than any that ever rolled out of Detroit. Whatever the embellishments, acceleration, speed, and getting away down to the other end of the line before someone else is the final measure of a drag racer's pony. At the tippy top of the qualifying list are the pure, unadulterated, super-duper dragsters, the real stars, thoroughbreds, or what-have-yous of drag racing. As you can see, breeding for speeding is so advanced that these machines have stopped looking like automobiles. If you've ever seen a car like this before, you've obviously been out to a drag race. Their engines are refined to the point where many can produce up to and beyond 1,200 horsepower. The big problem is getting that power off the traction. The driver-mechanic breeder also tries to put as much weight as possible on the rear wheels. That's why the engine sits where it does, practically in the driver's lap. The front wheels look as if they were stolen from your nephew's tricycle. The whole contraption comes off looking like a better device for running down mice, or something out of a 1930 futuristic film. They wear special suits of asbestos and breathing masks, just in case their engines blow up, I guess. They also wear them for the sheer mummery of the thing. The bit about blowing up, though, is no gag. Most of the contraptions that look like a cross between a praying mantis and a hardware store generally operate on a lethal combination of alcohol and nitromethane. The machine that sniffs this popping stuff is called a fuel dragster, as opposed to gas. And that's a machine that not only goes like, but makes all the smoke that one imagines in hell. Cars like these can turn anywhere from 150 to 210 miles an hour, from a standing start in as little time as 8 or 9 seconds. For comparison's sake, a good old paint stocker might turn a little bit over 100 in maybe 12 seconds. After a run, at least to the finish line, a dragster needs a parachute to stop. Well, it takes some skill to drive a 1,320-foot aisle in a reasonably straight line. To do it faster than some others calls for mechanical skills. And all of these men out here, even the worst, most chronic losers, have an extraordinary degree of expertise with engines.
426 cubic inches is completely blueprinted, which means that everything's to factory tolerances. We have a Hillborn injection system on it, which has an individual velocity stack and ram tube to each cylinder.
This is a 65 Chevelle. It's all fiberglass. It's built for exhibition racing only. It burns on nitromethane fuel, not gasoline.
It's a Chrysler Hemi, 354 cubic inch.
Well, we have a 1948 English Austin with a Chrysler 392 supercharged Chrysler engine in it. It's a hygromatic and an Oldsmobile rear.
65% nitro and rest is alcohol.
While these men and boys may be playing, they're playing at the level of factory engineers. In another sense, they're like musicians, toying with a fine instrument and trying it out under ever-changing conditions. And for what purpose? Except to haul one hyper-competitive human being a quarter mile down the asphalt aisle and I tick faster than someone else. Maroon, kaboom, plus stink. That's all you want to get out of drag racing. That's all you'll take away. But in fact, for every car that goes zipping along this asphalt band-aid, there's a garage in which several reasonably clean-cut young men stand about playing midwife to a motor. It takes place in a garage like this one. Let's lay it out dramatically. For the time being, we've got two protagonists futzing around in a garage in the Havertown area. The heavy fellow is John Gans. The other is named Bob Keogh. They're both in their 20s.
All I know is, with these heads in this supercharger, we should really make it.
The time the car is running is a very small percentage of the sport because you have all this time and labor tied up in getting the car ready, make sure it's running perfect. You get the car running, it only runs for 8 or 10 seconds. So there's just as much enjoyment for me as watching the car run, getting it ready, taking it to the races, meeting people at the races, than there is in driving it.
This thing, car in the conventional sense, it can't be called, is in the fancy section of the classifications handbook as a double C fuel dragster, or a double A altered coupe. Its body is a variation of a standard production model, but Lord, what they've done to the whole.
It's a 34 Ford body, basically.
That's for starters.
It has a chopped top. If all the cross members in the frame have been removed. We installed a 57 Chrysler Imperial motor, which has a 671 supercharger on it. Every part in the engine, except for the basic block, is all custom made.
It may look and sound like gobbledygook to you, but this is a high-priced piece of tinker toy.
The total investment in the car is somewhere between $4,500 and $6,000.
Now mind, dear viewer, we are not dealing here with a couple of kids with large allowances. Bob is a married man with 2 kids that like to eat as much as Bob and his wife. And Bob's helper on his machine this evening, John, is a graduate pharmacist, both a friend and brother of Bob's partner in the business, which earns the Keogh family the daily crackers. Bob Keogh and this young man, Chris Gans, operate the K&G Speed Shop, an automotive specialty outfit. Both young men put in a full day's labor here, selling doodads, geehaws, and essentials to drag racing fans. A lot of what they sell may seem like so much gleaming junk to the ordinary motorist. But since the shop has little, if any, truck with ordinary motorists, things like magnesium wheels, tachometers, manifolds, and so on are not only stock in trade, but the stuff that keeps a habit supported. It's also a habit that keeps John and Bob away from home at hours when family would like to see one of them, especially on a Saturday night, when a guy who's both daddy and hubby sits assembling an auto engine at 2 or 3 in the morning.
We work probably at least 20 hours a week on it, every week through the entire summer.
Who gets more attention, the car or Mrs. Keogh?
I sort of have my wife trained to this way of life. I've always been this way, and we go to the races together, and it's just a family thing.
The next day, Atco, as always, attracted all classes of drivers. The drivers, owners, and teams that steer, pay for, and work over cars. They break down into 3 categories. At the bottom are the drivers of stockers. They have at best a small investment in their cars, either in cash or in time, and basically can expect nothing much for the efforts by way of return. maybe a gilded lead trophy or a case of lube. At the top of the mountain where the kings and big daddies live, there are the exhibition drivers, the record holders. Drivers like Don Big Daddy Garlitz, who was paid feature attraction money at Atco this day with his super monster dragster. Now, even if the overbred automotive beast fizzles, he's to be paid a fee like celebrities always are.
Take your wheels to the right some, Bob. A little bit to the right. Keep them going to the right. It's beautiful. Beautiful. All right, straighten up.
Bob and the K&Gers constitute a middle ground among drag types. He does what he does for the fun, and of course the money in it if he can win any. But in most instances, his oddball, hyper-hybrid, never has any competition. If an award is ever offered for his class, he's assured of picking it up with no threat of challenge. Really, the only logical reason he runs his highly stylized heap down that asphalt aisle, aside from the kicks of speed and other related items, is that it's good advertising for the speed shop. If his car performs, his products might, at least in the eyes of potential buyers. Their first job at the track is to see if their time-devouring monster will actually run. Before starting an engine like this, there are a lot of ritual doings that have to be gone through. Pouring in fresh oil, almost 2 gallons of it. Then the fuel, nitro and alcohol, has to be mixed. We can show you how it looks here, but until television advances further, I'll have to leave the smell of this stuff to your imagination. Now they're ready to start the engine. The noise is deafening like all the horses in Jersey stampeding. The boys from K&G wouldn't stay long in business if they opened up that engine in their home neighborhood. There's much more work still to be done before the baby gets on the strip. Meanwhile, back at the strip itself, other drivers are making time trials, testing out their engines and generally having a speedy ball. Above the screams and roars of the head-up engines, the perceptive drag fan can make out the voice of the frenetic young man calling the races in the styles of a rock and roll radio announcer.
103 miles an hour, real good running Olds 442. Coming up the return.
And between runs, there's a barely audible thread of rock for the musically inclined to rest their ears. The sun gently sinks out of sight in the western sky, leaving a handful of electric lights to illuminate the scene. By night, the K&Gers were at last ready to roll after a full 24 hours of work.
Now in the 9-second rocket.
All the sleeplessness and sweat that went into the hours before this simple time trial, the K&G buggy didn't do so hot. It clocked a speed somewhere in the 90s, a speed that could easily be topped by any running stocker. But something happened out there on the strip that wasn't the fault of the engine. The driver, it seems, hit an oil slick left by another car, and the machine had to shut down. Basically, they were pleased.
Pretty good. Maybe a little better next time.
This was only a test. The engine ran, and that's all that really counts. The last time the boys had their tough little buggy out...
The last time we had supercharger failure. It happened, the supercharger exploded. We replaced it with a new one. I don't anticipate any problem. There's always that chance, but we're hoping for a very good day.
And if you've been seduced into riding with these guys and following their hopes for their car, you too are expecting a good day, at least for their sakes. But there are lots of other attractions and excitements for the crowds in the stands, and possibly for you sitting at home. There's Big Daddy Garland. But while such relative nonsense goes on, the K&G crew is preparing for another run. A run that might make some sense, considering all the sweat and time that's gone into their car. And while the Bob and Jacks of their dragging world sit over their very hot engines, those fans, fickle as ever, are trotting over that now hardly visible red clay of the Atco real estate for an overpriced hot dog and a cup of flat Pepsi, knowing full well it's their generation, baby, and hang the indigestion. At the pit, where grease monkeys are artists, Bob, Jack, Chris, their driver, Killer Kinsley, and various hangers-on are all putting the car into shape for another run. Where that run will get them is open for debate. So far, the car hasn't been doing them much justice. Perhaps this next time it will. And it does. They pulled down their highest speed for the year so far, 161 mph. And the moral of that run in this entire sport is do better next time. So you find the guys from K&G, fathers and pharmacists, playing with technological toys while other attractions amuse the crowds. They change oil to prepare another fuel concoction. They make use of well-wishers. They check spark plugs, full parachutes. What all isn't there that they do? And then. A run in the midst of which the engine has the rotten, even lousy taste to blow up. But those are the brakes. Other drivers are trotting themselves over to the trophy room to pick up one of those gilt lead-on marble base monstrosities that all of us at one time or the other have vied for. The difference is that these have little gold cars on the top, and the boys from K&G are behaving like men. These guys will be back next week with something replaced, something else refined, even if it cost them $1,000. Sound silly?
Well, I think every racer really can't define why he's doing it. I like it. That's what it all boils down to. I've been doing it for 10 or 15 years, and this is something I just started tinkering around with cars when I was in high school, and it's a way of life now.